everybody, Mr. Ricchini here. So today we are going to be talking about classification of living things. So we started getting into a little bit of this about sorting and sort of finding some characteristics that we're saying, but now we're going to try to understand why that's so important in science. So exploring the diversity of life helps if we can group things or classify things in different ways. So why do we need to classify things? What's the importance of it in science? When we classify things or group things based on shared characteristics, it's fundamental to how humans understand the world around us. We are always grouping things and organizing things to help us with dealing with the world around us. For example, in some communities, when we have recycling programs in some communities, I know like most college campuses do this as well, but they don't just say throw everything into one bin. They say we need to sort them. So if you go to Penn State or Pitt and you go to the dining commons and you are taking your tray of stuff back to the dishwashers, you're going to see that they're going to have a recycling center, and that recycling center is going to say, hey, anything that's paper, put in this bin. Anything that's plastic, put in this bin. Anything that's glass, put in that bin, and so forth. And we are grouping them based on some sort of characteristic. That helps us when we are trying to make sense of the world around us. So we can do that with recycling, but what about organisms and living things around us? When we start to identify shared characteristics and group them based on those shared characteristics, it can help us make predictions and actually see patterns that maybe we haven't seen before. So grouping things, as it says here, it helps us to organize information, identify relationships, and make predictions about what we encounter. So why are we grouping things? To help us better understand the world around us and to make things easier to talk about, to discover, to explore, to study. If things are organized, it's better. That's what we've been trying to tell you about your science binders. Keep it organized and things are easier, right? For example, just imagine if you were to walk into a store like Home Depot and you needed to buy something for a project. And when you walked in there, you realized right away that something was wrong because they have eliminated all of their departments in the store. So if that were to happen, you would walk in there and most likely the store would be a huge mess. You would see all the products mixed up. You would see screwdrivers with hoses and saws with buckets and shovels over with the paint and everything, right? It would be just everything would be thrown wherever, and they say, good luck finding stuff, have at it. What would happen here? Well, 90% of the people that would go in there would probably leave. And the reason why that is because the shopping experience would drastically be different, potentially causing a lot of frustration because you can't find what you need. A lot of people, especially when they're building projects and doing projects, they need something, they go in, they get what they need, and they get out. Can you do that in a store like this? No. It might take you an hour, 2 hours, sifting through all that stuff to finally find the screw that you need for your project. Meanwhile, if you had a store that was organized, all the screws would be in one place. So this causes frustration. It causes things to slow down. It causes things to not be as easy if things are a mess. So keeping organized, whether we're talking about Home Depot, your binder, or organizing all the living things on this planet, that can help us stay organized. So how is Home Depot organized? Again, Home Depot is organized into areas of the store based on characteristics that products share, right? So if we share certain characteristics, we can put them in the same area of the store. For example, if you need a can of paint, or a paintbrush, or a paint bucket, something dealing with paint, you're going to walk over to the paint department. That's where that stuff should be. It may take you still some time there, but at least you're not looking in the entire store trying to find a paintbrush. You know that it's over in the paint department. If you need a new washer and dryer, Then you're going to go over to the appliance department. Why? Because that's where all their refrigerators, all their stoves, all the appliances are in one area. It's not just hidden behind something in a random aisle. If you are building a deck or building a shed or need some sort of wood, like a 2x4 or a piece of plywood, again, it's not going to be outside in the garden section. It's going to be in the lumber section where all the wood products are. And if you need a drill or a screwdriver or a hammer, there's a whole section, a couple rows of tools. There's a giant tool department where if you need a tool, go to the tools, right? Excuse me. So it's very similar to playing cards. If you've ever played cards before, again, here are some great games. If you've never played them, I encourage you to look into them. Spades, hearts, rummy, bridge, all fun games to play. But all of those require you to hold cards in your hands, right? And if you have an unorganized hand, it can actually make play for you slow and more difficult. If you don't know anything about those games, some of those games like hearts and spades, certain cards are worth more or more powerful cards than others. And so if you have a hand that just randomly has all your cards thrown in there, you might not see a card that you need or that you could have played until later on in the hand or in the round. So most people take their cards, and the first thing they do after they shuffle their cards and they get dealt their cards is they start reorganizing them, and they put them in some sort of system that makes sense to them. They organize them so it makes sense to them, so it's easier for them to find it. So it gives them a better strategy and it has them make faster connections as far as what card they want to play. Here you can see this hand here. What did we organize it by? We organized it by the suits. So all the diamonds are together, all the spades are together, all the hearts and all the clubs are together. But not only that, notice, are all the clubs in order from smallest to biggest? Are all the hearts in order from smallest to biggest? Yes. So even further organizing the small groups can help you make your game more enjoyable and faster, and maybe even give you a chance to win because you're not going to mess up. So just like you might group cards by suit or numbers, scientists also group all living things based on shared characteristics. Like, does something have a backbone? Is something multicellular? Can it make its own food, or does it have to go get its own food? Does every living thing have a backbone? No. So if we just say that, we have things with a backbone and things without a backbone. We can easily start to separate those things and start to sort those things. Scientists have done that for all living things. Where did this idea of classification start? It actually started way back in 380 BC with the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. Maybe you've heard of him, maybe you've talked about him already in history class, but regardless, Aristotle was the first person to actually say, let's try to organize what we see around us. And he basically said that everything in the world, all living things in the world, can be broken down into two different kingdoms. They use the word kingdoms. It's not necessarily the same kingdoms, but it kind of is. So the kingdoms that he said was animals and plants. And from a very, very basic understanding of this, that makes sense. If you're living in 380 BC and you look around, you see that's an animal, that's a plant. Well, that's not an animal. It's got some leaves. It's probably a plant, right? Those are the two main things that jump out at you right away. Those are the easiest ones to see. So it makes sense that that's what he saw first. But it wasn't until Carl Linnaeus in 1735 that he started to really put this stuff together and started to make more sense of it. Carl Linnaeus started this whole biological classification system that he called, it's a big word here, binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature. It's a big word, right? But what does that mean? Binomial. Bi means two. So two naming system, essentially. So all living organisms were going to be given two names. So we are going to try to classify them and separate them, whatever, based on shared characteristics. But now we're going to have a purpose. They're going to have one name and a second name. think of it like you. I mean, you have a first name and a last name, right? Are there other Johns out there? If your name's John, are you the only John that lives out there? No. So we have to designate you as John Smith or John, Williams or whatever. So we need a first and a last name. Now, it's not quite that, but that's a good way to think about that. When we think about Carl Linnaeus's system, he basically said that all living things are going to be given a two-part scientific name. And that's another way of thinking of binomial nomenclature. Think of it as the scientific name, all right? So binomial nomenclature is a tongue tire, it's a tongue twister, and it's hard to get out, but scientific name, that's a little bit easier. So basically means the same thing. So what is a scientific name? What are the two parts that we need? Well, every living thing, every living organism is going to be given a genus. That's like the first name. And a genus is a more general grouping. Things that can sort of say that we're not specific, sort of like John. This is John. Well, that's also John, and that's John, and that's John, and that's John. And these are all Johns. So that's our first name, a more general grouping. Notice that how do you write a genus? The genus is always italicized and always capitalized. So make sure that the first letter there is capitalized. That's how we write genuses. Species is the second name. It's the more specific name. It's the one that gives it, saying that this is the only one of those genuses that fits this category. Again, that'd be like the last name. So we have a room full of Johns, but this John is John Williams. That John is John Smith, right? So they're different names. The second name gives it a more specific identification to that more general group. Again, species are italicized again, but they're not capitalized. Now, when you're writing these by hand, again, italicized is a little bit hard to do, but definitely when you're typing them in, make sure you choose the italicized button for both the genus and the species. Let's look at a couple examples here on the screen. We've got lots of living things on the screen here. The first one over there is this pine tree, right? So it's actually a white pine tree, and it has the genus Pinus and the species Strobus. So Pinus strobus is the scientific name for this white pine tree. We know that it's a pine tree, so that's why it's Pinus, but it's white pine, and that's why it's strobus. Humans, right? Humans are Homo sapiens. So we probably have heard that word before, Homo sapiens. This is the genus and species for us. We are Homo sapiens. Now, as of right now, we are the only surviving species of the genus Homo. There are other species of that Homo genus that have since gone extinct and gone away. Things like Homo habitus, Homo Neanderthal. You probably have heard of Neanderthals, right? So those are things that were similar to us, but are no longer here. So we are the only current species of the Homo genus. But makes a good point that even if something is, long been extinct, and we find it in a fossil, we can still give it a scientific name. Here's Tyrannosaurus rex. Tyrannosaurus is actually the genus of this living organism, and Rex is the species. There's many different types of Tyrannosaurus, but there's only one type of Tyrannosaurus rex. So no matter what, all living things are going to be put into this two-name naming system. All right? So why do we need a two-name naming system? That seems really confusing, right? I mean, those words, where do they even come from? They're actually from Latin. And we use the Latin words because Latin is considered a dead language, means no one's using it anymore. And why is that better for science? Well, because if it's a dead language, that means that those words really aren't going to change their meaning. In our society now, there's new slang words coming out, new meanings for this, new meanings for that. We're constantly changing the dictionary meanings of certain, pop culture words, whatever. But Latin words aren't going to change, and they kind of describe the characteristic that you're trying to describe. All right, so that's what the Latin words are really doing. But still, if it's these weird words, why are we using it? Why can't we just call it what it is? Call it a pine tree, call it a dinosaur, call it a human being, right? Why do we have to use scientific names? Well, sometimes organisms, they have multiple common names, and it can confuse people depending on where you are talking. So if you are talking in one place in the world or another place in the world, people may not know what you're talking about. It's hard to communicate. It's hard to share information. It's hard to make observations if you aren't talking about the same thing. Here's an example. All right. So you have this beautiful cat here. All right. And does anybody know what this cat's name is? Well, it depends on where you live. All right. If you live in South America, Central America, or for some reason all the way up in Yukon, Canada, in those areas, if you were to spot this animal out in the wild, people would refer to it as a puma. So you're looking at a puma, right? Is that what you thought? Is that what you thought this one was? If you didn't think it was a puma, maybe you live someplace else. Maybe you live anywhere else in Canada, or in the state of Washington, or the state of Oregon. If you lived in Oregon, Washington, or anywhere else in Canada except for Yukon, if you saw the same animal, you would have called it a cougar. Did you get it now? Was that your guess? No? All right, well, maybe you live in Florida. If you live in Florida and you saw this animal out in the wild, the same exact animal, you would probably call this a panther, right? That's what people would call this, is a panther. This is a panther. But we've only talked about Canada, South America, Central America, and 3 states in the United States. So what about everywhere else in the United States? What if you saw this animal in Pennsylvania or in, Colorado? You wouldn't call it any of these. You would call it a mountain lion. So this is a mountain lion, not a puma or panther or cougar, but it is. It is, and it's not. It depends on where you live. Obviously, if you live in State College, PA, it's known as a Nittany lion, right? So that's what their mascot's named after. So here's the point, is we have one animal, the exact same animal. If I put it in a truck and took it to these different places and said, hey, what is this? If you're in South America, you'd say, oh, it's a puma. Go to Florida, oh, it's a panther. Go to Washington, it's a cougar. Go to Pennsylvania, it's a mountain lion, right? They're going to identify it as what they've known it. Scientifically, that's a mess. That's like having all your papers all shuffled together and you don't know what you're talking about. So we need to organize it so that no matter where you are, no matter what location you are, we are going to refer to this scientifically as the same organism. And so this organism is known as Puma concolor. And so this is what all those things are basically referring to. Doesn't matter where you live. If you're in Florida, this is the name. If you live in Brazil, this is the name. If you live in Mexico, that's the name. If you live in New York, that's the name. It's one scientific name that basically says, forget about all those common names. Anybody can call it whatever they want, but this is what scientifically we're going to refer to it as. Okay? So, levels of taxonomic classification. Remember, Carl Linnaeus is the one that started us with this idea of genus and species, this binomial nomenclature system of getting these 2 common names. But over the years, we've learned more and more and more. I mean, that was back in the 1700s. And over the years, we've learned more and more and more about these creatures and found out more common characteristics that things share. So this system that Linnaeus created was later expanded to 8 levels. There are now 8 levels of taxonomic classification. So we kept the same 2 bottoms. So the most specific is species, a little bit more general is genus, and then we can go up. We have family, we have order, we have class, we have phylum, we have kingdoms, and we have domains. These are the 8 taxonomic classification levels for identifying every living organism on the planet. Obviously, starting at the top with the domain and working your way down to the very specific in species. So domains are very general, and species are very, very specific. So domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Know that in that order, from most general down to most specific, because that's going to help us organize living things back into what it actually is, and to help us identify those living organisms. So how can you remember this? Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Well, if you can't remember them, let me give you another simple way to remember these 8 taxonomic classifications. I'd like to give you these crazy little ways to remember, right? So here's another one. Disrespectful king penguins came over for grandma's spaghetti. Disrespectful king penguins came over for grandma's spaghetti. DKPCOFGS. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So just remember a bunch of penguins being disrespectful at grandma's house while they're trying to eat spaghetti, right? So disrespectful king penguins came over for grandma's spaghetti. All right, let's talk a little bit about these taxonomic levels. So we'll start with domains, all right? And all living things can be placed into 3 domains. So what are the 3 domains? We have bacteria, we have archaea, and we have eukarya. I've given you the pronunciations there to help you with those words. So bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. What separates them? Obviously, there's characteristics that make each of these unique. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about these. First of all, the bacteria. If something fits into this domain, and by the way, these are the 3 domains. So this is the biggest category, and there's only 3 of them. So that means every living thing you see fits into this. You fit into one of these categories. Are you bacteria? Are you archaea? Or are you eukarya? Which one are you? Because, again, we are in one of these domains. So start with bacteria. Bacteria are all things that are unicellular. Well, we're not in that one. We're definitely not unicellular, right? Bacteria also lack a nucleus. Again, we haven't got into the cell structure yet, but we'll talk more about what a nucleus is. It's kind of like the central brain of a cell. And it also has this unique compound for its cell walls, for the outer layer of its individual cells. Again, we'll talk more about that as we get into it. If you break down bacteria in that domain, how many kingdoms does bacteria have? It only has 1 kingdom. So this is a very, very singular column here. The domain is bacteria, the kingdom is bacteria, and then we start to separate a little bit more into individual types of bacteria. All right. So, but the bacteria again is 1 kingdom, the same name as the domain. So bacteria domain, bacteria kingdom, and then we start to separate things out. All right. How about archaea? So something has to be different with archaea than bacteria, right? So archaeas are also unicellular. So they're unicellular, which means that, again, we are not archaea. So we're not bacteria, we're not archaea, we're definitely multicellular, so we're going to be probably the last one there. Archaeas also lack that nucleus, so again, we'll talk more about that, about why or what makes that difference or what a nucleus is later on. It also has a unique compound for its cell walls, but it is a different compound or different makeup of that compound than the bacteria. So the cell walls of bacteria and archaea are slightly different from one another. All right, and so again, more detail, we'll get into this later. But the last thing that really separates archaea is the fact that archaeas are these unicellular organisms that can thrive in very hostile environments, extreme environments. So we're talking about hot springs, extreme salty water like salt lakes, acidic lakes near a volcano. They can survive in these places when other organisms can't. So they have a unique ability to adapt to those extreme environments. How many kingdoms does archaea have? Again, just like bacteria, it only has one kingdom, and just like bacteria, it also has the same name. So we have archaea domain, archaea kingdom. All right, and then we can go on from there. Last one is eukarya. Eukarya is unicellular or multicellular. So we can have unicellular organisms or multicellular organisms that fit this one. So we're definitely multicellular. It's the only domain that is multicellular, so that means we are part of the eukarya domain. What also really makes this a different domain is the fact that these cells do have that nucleus, that missing piece that the other two don't. So this is really what separates the eukarya from the archaea and the bacteria. These cells also will contain DNA, again, something else that we'll be talking more about what that is and how that works and what that means for that cell. And eukarya actually have 4 different kingdoms. 4 different kingdoms. So while the other two only had 1 kingdom, this one has 4 kingdoms. So let's talk about what those 4 kingdoms are. The eukarya domain, all living things in this domain can be placed into one of 4 different kingdoms. And 2 of those kingdoms actually come all the way back from us, or to us, from Aristotle, right? So let's talk about what these 4 kingdoms are. The first one is called Protista. So Protista, then we have the second one, which is fungi, and then we have Plantae and Animalia. So the last 2, you pretty much figure out that those are plants and animals, right? So that's what Aristotle said, that we have 2 kingdoms, plants and animals. He just missed the other 2 because we didn't know that much about it. So what is Protista? Protista is organisms that are mostly unicellular. Remember, they have a nucleus, but they're mostly unicellular. And just because they have a nucleus, they can also move. They're also mobile. So they have some way of moving around in whatever environment they are currently living. So singular organisms, single-celled organisms that can move with a nucleus, right? So that's all what Protista is. Fungi. Fungi are mostly multicellular. So they're going to be mostly multicellular, and that's going to be the same for the plant and the animal kingdom there. But these don't generally move around. If you've ever seen a mushroom, which is a fungus, it doesn't walk through the forest, unless it's in Super Mario Brothers or something like that, right? But it's stuck in place. And the last thing about these things is they are going to be great absorbers of food. These guys love to break down other living things and absorb it. There's no mouths, they don't eat, but they absorb that food into them. Plants or Plantae, again, multicellular, so these are all multicellular, and they can make their own food. That's what is one big characteristic about all plants. All plants have the ability to create their own food from the sun through that process of photosynthesis, which we'll talk about more specifically later. Animalia, that's where we are. We are in the animal kingdom because we are multicellular. We don't produce our own food, so we have to go out and take or eat our own food. Those are some general guidelines for those 4 kingdoms. There's some more characteristics that separate those, but if you use those characteristics, it can definitely help you identify which one is Protista, which one's fungi, which one's Plantae, which one's Animalia. Let's look at an example of how this 8 taxonomic classification system works. Look at a brown bear. All right, so here's a brown bear. What do we know about a brown bear? Well, first of all, we know that in its domain, it lives, or it is assigned to eukarya, right? Because it's definitely multicellular, and we know that it has ability to eat and whatever, but its cells have a nucleus. So this is eukarya. But if we stopped right here and just said this scientific name is eukarya, that's no good. Look at the number of species that are in eukarya. It says between 4 to 10 million. It's probably closer to 10, probably closer to 12. It's a big number. There's lots and lots of things that are found in eukaryote. As long as it's not bacteria or archaea, it's going to be in this list. So we can't stop here. We have to go to our next one. So we got to go to our kingdom. And our kingdom is Animalia. So what makes it Animalia is the fact that it's multicellular and it cannot produce its own food. All right, so it cannot produce its own food. It doesn't absorb food. So this puts it into Animalia. Right away, what did we just do to the number of species? We're coming down the triangle. We're getting smaller, right? We went from 10 million possibilities to now to 2 million. Still a big number, but we just significantly got rid of a whole bunch of stuff. So next, we got to go to phylum Chordata. And Chordata simply means that it has a backbone. So out of those animal kingdoms, out of those animals, which ones have a backbone? We have 50,000 of them, right? So significantly dropping the number of possible species. Go to our class. This bear belongs in the class Mammalia, which means it's a mammal. And mammals have certain characteristics that lizards and fish and birds don't, right? So lots of different things that can make a mammal different than other characteristics. So we've gone down 4 levels, and we've gone from 10 million possibilities down to 5,000 possibilities. This is becoming a better solution here. We have a better chance of identifying what this animal is. Order is Carnivora. I'm sure you've heard of what carnivores are, right? Carnivores are things that eat meat. So out of those mammals that we had, 5,000 mammals, we are now talking that we have only 270 that are considered carnivores. We're getting closer to a smaller number. As soon as we go down to the family, look what happens. Out of those carnivores, we go to the family Ursidea. And Ursidea, there's only 8. That's basically saying the bear family. So there are 8 different types of this specific family of bear. Genus, Ursus. There are 4 in that one. And finally, we get to the species. I know Ursus is written again, but the species is Arctos. And Arctos is the specific name of the brown bear. It's the species of that brown bear. So we went from 10 million possibilities down to 1. Ursus arctos is the scientific name for this bear. How can scientists remember every single organism? How can you remember how to identify or what those things are, what those scientific names are? A lot of times we can't. We need help. We need tools. And one of the tools that scientists use is called a dichotomous key. A dichotomous key is a simple little sort of like choose your own adventure, if you will, to help you find the answer at the end of your story. If you ever read a choose your own adventure, you always read something that says, if you want to do this, go to page 6. You want to do this, go to page 17. And you choose your own adventure. And every time you read it, it can be different, right? Well, this is a dichotomous key that helps you lead not to the end of a story, but to the scientific name of whatever it is you're looking at. So a dichotomous key is a tool used for identifying unknown items or organisms by comparing observable traits, that's key, observable traits to a series of paired choices based on specific characteristics. Why is observable traits key? Because we can't assume anything. We can't say, I'm looking at that and I believe it has a 4-chamber heart. You don't know that, right? Now, if we do autopsies and stuff like that, maybe, but observable traits are what we can see and observe, when we're out in the field. This is a dichotomous key. Using a dichotomous key is very similar to the game Guess Who. Has anybody ever played the game Guess Who? If you've never played the game Guess Who is a game where you try to guess which card your opponent, which person your opponent on the other side of the table has. In this case here, we see our setup. This is what we're seeing. And we have our cards, and all of our cards are flipped up, and we can see all their faces, and they all have names, right? And at the very front of our board is Jake. And Jake is the card that we picked. So our opponent is trying to guess that we have Jake, and we're trying to guess what he has. We don't know that. So how do we do this? We have to narrow down our possible suspects by asking simple questions based on shared characteristics. For example, if we were playing this game and we went first, maybe I would ask my opponent, I said, is your person wearing a hat? And if they say no, then immediately I can flip down or cross out all the people on my board that are wearing hats. I know that that can't be them, right? Here's a yes or no answer. Either, what did I look at? I looked at my board and I said, there are people wearing hats and there are people not wearing hats. This can help me narrow down my choice. Just like that brown bear, we narrowed down choices by picking certain characteristics that that bear had that other things did not. So we've eliminated 5 people here. My opponent would go ask me a question. I would give them the answer. Then it would be our turn again, right? And I would say, does your person have white hair? And my opponent might say, no, doesn't have white hair. So now I've eliminated 4 more people. So now I've had 9 people off the board and still a bunch of people left. My opponent's turn, they would ask me a question. I would give them the answer. Then it would be our turn again. Does your person have a mustache? Looking at the board, I see that some people have mustaches and some people don't. So my opponent says, yes, my person does have a mustache. So what's that mean? I can eliminate everybody on the board that doesn't have a mustache. Get rid of all of them. Immediately, I'm down to 4 possible suspects. I've asked 3 questions and I'm down to 4 people. So I now, again, let my opponent go. It's now my turn again. And I ask, does your person have black hair? Yes or no? And my opponent says, yes, which means any of the 4 remaining people that don't have black hair, I can cross off, which means I have everybody on my board crossed off or flipped down except for 1. Which means I've identified his card, and I ask the person, is your person Tyler? And he says, yes. Notice, what does Tyler have? Tyler is not wearing a hat. Tyler does not have white hair. Tyler does have a mustache, and Tyler does have black hair. He fits all the criteria that I've asked, so those questions have led me to the only possible answer, which is Tyler. Let's look at this with a real world example. How about tree identification? If we look at tree identification, we can take a look at a leaf from a tree. There's a leaf from a tree right here. All right, it's a leaf that has many leaflets with it. But we can look at that, and if we have the right dichotomous key, we should be able to identify what type of tree that is. So let's put our dichotomous key here. And it's going to be, you'll notice it's very similar to the Guess Who game where we're asking a lot of questions, but instead of yes or no, there's choices, right? Does it have this characteristic or that characteristic? So we're asking that. No matter what you do, every time you use a dichotomous key, you cannot start anywhere except for number 1. So always start from number 1. Don't think you can go someplace else and start. Always start from number 1, no matter if you think you know the answer or not. So let's look at number 1 here. Number 1 says, does your tree have A, needle leaves, like a pine tree, or non-needle leaves? Well, this one is not needles, so this is non-needles. And notice what it tells me. If I chose that, where do I need to go? I need to go to number 3. So I'm going to go to number 3. So I'm skipping number 2 and going to number 3. Number 3 says, are the leaves simple leaves, meaning it's one single leaf, or a compound leaf, which means it's made up of many leaflets? Obviously, there's many leaflets there, so this one is many leaflets. So we've now chosen 3B. It says to go to 7. So we're going to skip 4, 5, and 6. Skip all of those and go to number 7. It's choosing our own adventure, right? So number 7 says, are the leaflets attached at one single point or multiple points? In this case here, it's attached to multiple points. So that means this leaf is from a walnut tree. We've just identified it based on 3 questions. Try another one. Here's a different leaf. Same dichotomous key. Same exact dichotomous key. Again, a dichotomous key should not be good for just one organism. It should be good for a grouping of organisms. So the same dichotomous key, again, where do we start? Number one. So number one says, does your tree have needle leaves or non-needle leaves? Definitely not needle leaves, so we're going to skip number 2 and go to number 3. Number 3 says, are the leaves simple leaves, a single leaf, or a compound leaf made of many leaflets? Well, this time it's a single leaf. So it's made of one leaf, not a bunch of little leaves put together. So we're not going to skip 4, we're going to go to 4 this time. Number 4 says, do the leaves have smooth edges or jagged edges? And this is, if you look at it, that looks very smooth to me. So it's smooth edges. So we've now have our smooth edge, so we're going to go to number 5. Number 5 says, is the leaf edge smooth or lobed? Now, you may not know what those mean. A smooth edge would mean that it was like almost like an oval, like it goes out and comes right back, right? Like those leaflets were before. A lobe is like our earlobes, like it droops and comes down. So if you look at this leaf, it doesn't look like parts of an earlobe where you can put like an earring in. Yeah, so these are lobed leaves, which means this has to be a white oak tree. So same dichotomous key. This time we answered 4 questions to get us to our answer. Try one more. Last one. So again, where do we start with this one? Back to number 1. So number 1 says, does your tree have needle leaves or non-needle leaves? This time it's absolutely needle leaves. So we're going to go to number 2. Number 2 says, are the needle leaves clustered or are they in singlets? Clustered means that they're going to be all grouped together, and this one absolutely is clustered, so therefore this is a white pine. So same identification key, same dichotomous key, we've used it 3 different times, and we were able to identify 3 different types of trees based on these similarities on this choose your own adventure through this dichotomous key. So hopefully that all makes sense. Hopefully this idea of dichotomous keys and classifications, it's starting to make more sense to you. We're going to work more with this as we go through this, working with some dichotomous keys, sometimes reading a dichotomous key, sometimes having you make a dichotomous key, because you can really understand dichotomous keys if you can actually make your own. But if you think of it like that game Guess Who, what are the questions that are going to help lead you to this one organism? And again, it's got to be these questions that can be either this or that. There's no middle ground, there's no gray. It's either one side or the other. That's how a dichotomous key works. So hopefully you learned a little bit about the classification of living things, a little bit of the history, a little bit of dichotomous keys. But like always, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, see you later.